already doing things for you. And I pay your rent.
Yeah, you did pay my rent.
So why are you asking for more? Is that what you want me for?
I'm not looking for a sugar daddy, and I'm not a sugar baby. I got my own money. I will never ask you for anything.
See, this type of attitude, I could have found this in the States. I didn't have to come all the way to Madagascar
So why
to
did
get
you
this.
come?
Because I thought you were different.
He said it, and the air in the room changed, like someone had pulled the floor out from under Trisha's feet. And for a split second, you could see every hope, every plan, every late-night promise flicker in her eyes. Because when Rick finally let those words slip, it wasn't just a fight. It was a warning shot, a line in the sand. And suddenly, the future they'd been building together felt as fragile as glass. But before anyone could even catch their breath, thousands of miles away, Aviva's world was about to tilt on its axis too. Because one glance at Stig's phone was all it took to send. Her heart racing, her mind spinning, and her trust in him hanging by a thread. And if you think you've seen drama, you haven't seen anything yet. Because tonight, everything you thought you knew about these couples is about to be tested, twisted, and turned inside out. And you're not just watching. You're right in the middle of it. So welcome to TLC Drama Live. I'm Sabrina, and if you're ready for the kind of relationship chaos that makes you question everything, hit that subscribe button right now and drop your wildest theory in the comments. Because this is the episode where secrets don't just come out, they explode, and nobody is safe from the fallout. Not Rick, not Trisha, not Stig, not Aviva, and definitely not you. Because the stakes have never been higher, and the truth is about to get ugly. So buckle up, because we're about to pull back the curtain on two couples, 2 continents, and 4 hearts that are about to be pushed to their absolute limit. And if you think love is enough to survive what's coming, you might want to think again. Because Rick's generosity isn't as simple as it looks. And Trisha's loyalty is about to be tested in ways she never saw coming. With a rent payment that's about to become a weapon, a joke about bikinis that will spiral into a full-blown war, and a secret from Colombia that Rick would do anything to keep buried. But Trisha's patience is running out, and the next thing Rick says might be the last straw, while on the other side of the world, Stig's stage isn't the only place he's performing, because Aviva has flown halfway around the world for a man who can't stop singing about his ex, and there's a song that's more confession than music, a warning from Aunt Spring that refuses to be ignored, and a social media tag that could blow up everything. And Aviva's about to find out if Stig's loyalty is real, or if she's just another name in his playlist. And if you think you know where this is going, think again. Because what Rick says next will leave Trisha questioning everything she thought she knew. And what Aviva sees on Stig's phone will change the game forever. So don't blink, don't even look away for a second, because the real story is about to begin, and you're not going to want to miss a single moment. The sun was barely up, but the tension in that taxi was already thick enough to cut with a knife, because what should have been a romantic escape for Rick and Trisha was already starting to feel like a pressure cooker, and you could see it in the way Rick kept glancing at his phone, jaw clenched, eyes darting, as if he was waiting for something to go wrong. And Trisha, trying to keep things light, tossed out a playful joke about stopping at the mall for some new bikinis, but instead of a laugh or even a smile, Rick's whole mood shifted in an instant, and suddenly, the air was heavy with suspicion, and you could almost hear the unspoken accusations hanging between them. Because for Rick, this wasn't about bikinis at all. It was about every fear, every scar, every time he'd felt used or abandoned. And in that moment, he snapped, calling Trisha bougie, accusing her of seeing him as a walking wallet. And the look on her face said it all. because this wasn't the man she thought she knew, and this wasn't the trip she'd been dreaming about. And as the car rolled on, the silence grew louder, every mile taking them further from the fantasy and closer to the truth. And when they finally reached the hotel, the argument didn't die down. It exploded, with Rick throwing his generosity in Trisha's face, reminding her about the rent he'd paid, the things he'd done, as if love was a ledger and every kindness came with a price tag. And Trisha, blindsided, tried to defend herself, insisting she wasn't after his money, that she had her own. But Rick wasn't hearing it, because in his mind, every joke was a test, every request a trap, and the more she tried to explain, the more he pulled away. And you could see the hurt building in her eyes, the confusion turning to frustration, because how do you prove you're not a gold digger to someone who's already decided you are? And as the night dragged on, the fight circled back on itself. Rick's paranoia feeding off Trisha's pain, and Trisha's patience wearing thin. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Rick let something slip. A hint about a past relationship, a woman from Colombia, a secret he'd never fully shared. And for a split second, Trisha caught it. The way his voice changed, the way he looked away. And you could tell she knew there was more to this story than Rick was letting on. And if you think this is as bad as it gets, you're in for a shock, because the confrontation that's coming will leave both of them, and you, absolutely speechless. The morning after should have felt like a fresh start, but for Stig and Aviva, it was more like waking up in the middle of a storm, because even though the fight from last night had ended with whispered apologies and tangled sheets, the tension hadn't gone anywhere. It was just hiding under the surface, waiting for the next spark. And you could see it in the way Aviva watched Stig, searching his face for answers he wasn't giving, because every time she tried to believe his promises, the shadow of Vicki crept back in, and it wasn't just a name, it was a song, a story, a rumor that refused to die. And when Stig casually mentioned he'd be performing Vicki at his show tonight, Aviva's heart skipped, because that song wasn't just music, it was a confession, a reminder that she wasn't the first, and maybe not even the favorite. And as much as Stig tried to brush it off, saying it was, all in the past, Aviva couldn't shake the warning her Aunt Spring had given her before she left. A warning that Vicki wasn't just history. She was recent, she was real, and she was still in the picture. And when Aviva brought up the photos she'd seen, the tags on social media, the whispers that Vicki had been at Stig's last show, Stig's whole vibe changed, his charm slipping into defensiveness, his reassurances turning into accusations. And suddenly, Aviva was the problem. The jealous girlfriend. The one who couldn't let go. And it was like watching someone flip a switch. Because instead of answering her questions, Stig started questioning her, making her doubt her own instincts, her own sanity. And the more she pushed, the more he pulled away. Until Aviva was left wondering if she was losing her mind or just losing the man she'd crossed an ocean for. And as the day wore on, the tension only grew. Every word a landmine, every glance a challenge. And by the time the sun set, Aviva knew tonight's show wasn't just about music. It was about survival, because Stig was about to put her loyalty to the ultimate test. And what happens on that stage will push Aviva further than she's ever been pushed before. And if you think she's going to stand by and watch her worst fears play out in public, you're about to see what happens when love, pride, and humiliation collide in front of a crowd. Rick sat on the edge of the bed, his voice low, almost defeated, as he finally let the truth slip out about his ex-wife from Nigeria. And for a moment, the anger in the room faded, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. Because this wasn't just about bikinis or rent or even Trisha. This was about a wound that never healed, a marriage that fell apart under the weight of expectations Rick says he could never meet. And as he spoke, you could see the pain flicker across his face. The way he still carried the shame of not being enough, of being left behind when the money ran out. And suddenly, every paranoid question, every accusation, every time he'd thrown his generosity in Trisha's face made a twisted kind of sense, but that didn't make it any easier for Trisha to hear, because she was the one paying the price for someone else's betrayal. And as Rick tried to explain, Trisha's mind raced with everything she'd already given up. Her job, her friends, her whole life in Madagascar. All for a man who seemed determined to see her as a threat instead of a partner. And when she tried to tell him how much she needed to feel safe, how scary it was to leave everything behind and trust him with her future, Rick's walls shot right back up. And the argument about rent turned ugly, with Rick listing every bill, every favor, every dollar spent as if love was a transaction and Trisha was running up a tab. And the more he talked, the more Trisha's patience cracked. Because she never asked for any of this. She never wanted to be the villain in someone else's story. And as the fight circled back to the same old accusations, Trisha's voice finally broke. Her frustration spilling out as she begged Rick to see her for who she is, not who he's afraid she might become. But Rick couldn't let go. Not when the past was still haunting him. And in that moment, you could feel the distance between them growing, the hope slipping away. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, Rick let another secret slip. A half-finished sentence about his ex. In Colombia, a story he'd never told. And the look on Trisha's face said it all. Because she knew, deep down, that whatever Rick was hiding could be the thing that finally blows up everything they've tried to build. And if you think this is the end of their story, you're not even close. Because the real bombshell is still waiting to drop. The lights in the club were blinding, the music pounding so hard you could feel it in your chest. But for Aviva, every beat was a countdown to disaster. Because as the crowd pressed in and the energy built, she could see Stig slipping into his element, the superstar everyone came to see. And for a moment, she tried to believe that tonight would be different. That maybe he'd look at her the way he used to. But the second he grabbed the mic, and the first notes of Vicki hit the speakers, Aviva's heart dropped. Because he knew what that song meant. He knew how much it hurt her. And still, he chose to sing it. And not just sing it, but make a show of it. Locking eyes with women in the front row. Letting them touch him. Letting the whole room know that he was available. That he was wanted. And Aviva stood there, frozen, watching the man she'd crossed an ocean for turn her worst fear into a spectacle. And as the song went on, the humiliation burned hotter. Every lyric a reminder that she was just another girl in the crowd. And when she finally couldn't take it anymore, she pulled out her phone, desperate for a lifeline, a distraction, anything to keep from falling apart in front of everyone. But Stig saw her, and instead of understanding, he turned it on her, calling her out for not supporting him, for being on her phone, for making him look bad, and the blame game started right there, in front of everyone, with Stig painting himself as the victim, and Aviva as the problem. And the more he talked, the more the crowd ate it up, and the more alone Aviva felt, until finally she slipped away, her hands shaking as she typed out a message that could change everything. Because sometimes the only way to survive is to stop playing by someone else's rules. And if you think Stig has seen the last of Aviva's strength, you're about to find out what happens when heartbreak turns into resolve. And one message is all it takes to flip the script. Morning sunlight crept through the curtains, but it couldn't warm the chill that settled between Rick and Trisha, both of them lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word from the night before, And when Rick finally broke the silence, his apology sounded tired, almost rehearsed, as if he knew what he was supposed to say, but not how to mean it. And Trisha, still raw from the fight, wanted to believe him, wanted to let it go. So she nodded, whispered that she forgave him. But the words hung in the air, heavy with everything they hadn't said. Because forgiveness is easy to say, and so much harder to feel when the wounds are still fresh, and as they moved through the motions of the morning, making coffee, packing bags, pretending things were normal, you could see the distance in every glance, every forced smile, both of them wondering if love is enough when trust is so fragile. And across the world, Aviva woke up alone, the echo of last night's humiliation still ringing in her ears. And when Stig finally came back, his apology was more of a shrug, a half-hearted sorry that landed flat. And instead of comfort, Aviva felt the sting of self-doubt, wondering if she was too sensitive, too jealous, too much. And Stig, sensing her uncertainty, leaned into it, offering just enough affection to keep her close, but not enough to make her feel safe. And as the day dragged on, the resentment started to grow, small and silent, but impossible to ignore. Because Aviva knew she deserved better, but she was scared to ask for it, scared to push too hard and lose him for good. And as both couples tried to move forward, the truth sat between them like a ticking bomb, waiting for the right moment to explode. And if you think the worst is over, you're about to see what happens when secrets refuse to stay buried, and one confrontation threatens to bring everything crashing down. It started with a slip, a careless mention that Rick probably thought would go unnoticed, but Trisha caught it, the way his voice faltered when he talked about his past. And suddenly, the air was thick with questions she couldn't ignore anymore, so she pressed him, her voice trembling but determined. And Rick, cornered, finally admitted what he'd been hiding all along. A relationship in Colombia that ended in betrayal. A secret he'd buried because he was afraid it would ruin everything. And as the truth spilled out, Trisha's face crumpled, the trust she'd fought so hard to build, collapsing in an instant. And the room filled with accusations, with Rick insisting it was over, that it meant nothing, that he was only trying to protect her. But Trisha couldn't hear it, not when every promise now sounded like a lie. And the tears came fast, her anger mixing with heartbreak, her voice rising as she demanded to know what else he was hiding. And Rick, desperate, tried to explain, tried to reach her. But every word only made it worse. And Trisha, shaking, gave him an ultimatum. No more secrets, no more lies, or she was done. And for a moment, it looked like everything they'd built was about to fall apart, the future they'd imagined slipping through their fingers. And as Rick begged for another chance, Trisha turned away, her silence louder than any argument. And if you think this is the end, you're wrong. Because while Rick and Trisha's world is falling apart, something is brewing in Stig and Aviva's story. A twist so unexpected it will leave everyone questioning what's real and what's been hidden all along. Aviva's hands shook as she scrolled through her messages, her heart pounding with every new notification. Because there it was, undeniable proof. Photos of Stig and Vicki together after his last show. Tagged by friends, comments full of inside jokes, and suddenly every doubt, every warning from Aunt Spring, every uneasy feeling she tried to ignore, came crashing down all at once. And when she confronted Stig, her voice barely steady, the room erupted, his denial instant and loud, accusing her of believing gossip, of letting jealousy ruin everything. But Aviva wasn't backing down. Not. This time, not with the evidence right in front of them. And the argument spilled out into the hallway, voices echoing, doors opening as neighbors peeked out. And Stig, desperate to save face, tried to turn it all back on her. But Aviva's heartbreak was too raw, her anger too sharp, and for the first time, she let herself say everything she'd been holding in. Every fear, every disappointment, every time she'd felt like a backup plan. And the fallout was immediate. The couple's future suddenly hanging by a thread, with friends and strangers alike watching the drama unfold in real time. And as Aviva walked away, her phone buzzing with messages of support and curiosity, Stig was left alone. His reputation and his relationship both in pieces. And if you think you know how this ends, think again, because the final showdown for both couples is coming, and nothing will ever be the same. The air was thick, with everything left unsaid, both couples standing at the edge of something they might not come back from. And for Rick and Trisha, it was a moment that felt like the end and the beginning, all at once, because Trisha's ultimatum still echoed in the room. Her eyes searching, Rick's face for any sign that he could be the man she needed. And Rick, stripped of every excuse, finally let his guard down, confessing every fear, every mistake, every reason he'd built those walls so high. And for a second, it looked like forgiveness might be possible. But the pain was still fresh, the trust still broken. And Trisha had to decide if love was enough to risk being hurt again, her heart torn between hope and self-preservation. While Rick waited, breathless, knowing this was his last chance to prove he could change. And across the world, Aviva and Stig faced their own reckoning. The truth about Vicki now out in the open, the crowd's whispers still ringing in Aviva's ears. And Stig, for once, had no clever words. No song to hide behind, only the reality that his actions had consequences. And Aviva, exhausted and raw, laid it all out, telling him exactly what she needed, exactly what she deserved. And Stig, faced with losing her for good, finally saw what was at stake. But sometimes seeing isn't enough. And as the hours dragged on, both couples circled the same questions, the same fears, the same impossible choices. And when the sun finally set, decisions had to be made, fight for love or walk away for good. And as the doors closed and the tears dried, you could feel the weight of every word, every promise, every secret. And if you think you know who stays and who goes, don't get too comfortable, because there's a last-minute twist coming that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about these couples. And the fallout is only just beginning. When the storm finally passed, the silence felt heavier than any argument. And for the first time in weeks, Rick and Trisha sat across from each other without raising their voices. Both of them changed by everything they'd survived. And as they talked, the anger faded, replaced by something softer. A kind of understanding that only comes after you've seen the worst in each other and decided to stay anyway. But even as they promised to try again, to rebuild what was broken, there was a new honesty between them. A willingness to admit that love alone isn't always enough. That trust has to be earned. And for Trisha, that meant setting boundaries, making sure her needs were heard. And for Rick, it meant letting go of old fears, learning to see Trisha for who she is, not who he's afraid she might become. And as they hugged goodbye at the airport, neither of them knew what the future would hold. But for the first time, it felt like a real choice, not just a habit. And across the world, Aviva packed her bags in silence, her heart still aching from everything that had happened. But as she looked in the mirror, she saw someone stronger. Someone who refused to settle for half-truths and empty promises. And when Stig showed up at her door, apology in hand, she listened. But this time, she didn't let him talk her out of her feelings, didn't let him rewrite the story. And as she walked away head high, She knew she was choosing herself. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real victory. And as the credits roll on these chapters, the questions linger. Will Rick and Trisha's new beginning survive the next test? Or will old habits pull them apart again? And is this really the end for Aviva and Stig? Or is there another twist waiting just around the corner? Because if there's one thing we've learned, it's that nothing stays quiet for long. And every ending is just the start of a new story. So if you think you've seen it all, you're going to want to stick around. Because the next episode is about to take everything you thought you knew and turn it upside down. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.